Chapter 2 in the diversity planning process is where our discussion will begin for today. When we look at the diversity planning process, we're going to look at it from a perspective of looking at scanning or surveying, the establishment or building of goals, how we develop our strategy, and then how we use the internet as a tool today to assist us in pulling together the planning process. This planning process from a diversity standpoint can really be defined within a structure. When we scan, we're looking at the social roles and patterns, technology, how the economy plays into our development of the plan itself, the competitive aspects of it, and then a legal perspective, making sure that we have the protections in place. Goals are the second piece of the planning process. We want to make sure they're clear, they're sustainable, they're achievable to some degree over the life of the business itself, especially incorporating the diversity aspect of it. Strategy, our position in the marketplace, the communication that we have to our consumers and constituents groups, and then the delivery. There's a multitude of modalities that we can use today in the planning process. And then last but not least, the internet, looking for this competitive advantage in our value creation and differentiation, and then looking at the difference between e-commerce and e-business and really how facilitation and integration are so important in this equation. So let's look at the scan aspect of what we do. So what is it that really motivates us to develop diversity planning? Well, the social aspect is looking at the demographics, which speak right into the diversity discussion that we have. Technology, the more knowledge in the marketplace, the more people are able to not only manipulate the technology itself, but also the more efficient, hopefully, and productive they can become. From an economic standpoint, the political dynamics that come into play, competition, demand, and supply from various elements in the marketplace, and then the legal aspect of this discussion continues to be ever changing. So, the diversity-based scan looks at the social roles and patterns, the advances in awareness and technology, the finances and management of the economy, the competitive influence and alternatives, and then the market mix and protections that are provided from a legal standpoint. So how do we address these opportunities in our diversity planning process? Well, we've got to be really good at asking questions. That's the key piece of the scan that's so important. Think in terms of a really good survey, whether it's 8 questions or it's 80 questions, ask very good questions. And the quality of the scan is extremely important in the discussion. When we look at our diversity goals, they have to be clear throughout the entire operation, the marketplace, and they have to be multicultural in nature, sustainable over time in the life of the business. They align with the services, diversity programs, and diversity initiatives that we're going to launch in our ultimate diversity plan. They have to be achievable, which may be a surprise to some people, as to ensure success over time. So that means they can't be easy, nor can they be too difficult, but they have to be global and collaborative in their effort. And then our goals have to define leadership and our team's responsibilities overall. When we look at strategy in the diversity planning process, our position, ensuring the company is poised to succeed, is important. And here I make a quote, finding the right people, looking in the right places. So we've got to be able to look for people based upon their strength and not discriminate against them based upon their ethnicity, their gender, sexual orientation. And we've got to be able to build and look at the advantages of diversity and having a diverse strategy that's in lockstep with our business plan. And also understand that people bring something to the table. It's our job from a positioning standpoint to figure out what that strength is and then leverage that to the company's benefit. Communication, ensuring that it's constant and consistent, permeates throughout the entire general populace and gets the population engaged, whether it's internal to the organization or external as consumers. And then last but not least with strategy, the delivery, a multitude of modalities. So we're sensitive to culture, gender, sexual orientation, and understanding how to be able to reach people in the best means possible. That leads us to the internet. So the internet really and diversity are interesting bedfellows because there's a competitive advantage that can help us create value and differentiation. But we have to figure out from a diversity standpoint how to make that work. Now, the same could be said for e-business versus e-commerce. And so how do we facilitate and integrate those components? And that brings us to a question of how do we leverage our diversity strength and advantages online? And this becomes a little bit of work for some businesses because they don't necessarily look at it from this perspective. Our competitive or advantage is based upon the value that we create and the differentiation from our competitors, while at the same time being sensitive to the consumer and our employees who are extremely diverse in the United States today. E-commerce and e-business really is about facilitation and the ability to integrate all that we do. So when we look at the internet from a competitive advantage standpoint, we're really looking to establish core cultural competencies. And if you remember in chapter 1, we talked about cultural diversity, cultural proficiency, the ability to be able to move from one cultural segment to another in the business realm. This is what we're talking about that gives us a competitive advantage. At the same time, we'd like to be able to look at this and say, okay, the value creation that we have and the differentiation help us determine if these core cultural competencies are value added and truly do differentiate. And so they must be unique in order to do that, sustainable over time, as well as inclusive for everyone. Ensure the cultural core competencies are natural and anticipatory. So you can see the internet creates some incredible opportunities for us. And I give an example in this slide where it looks at e-commerce on the left and e-business on the right. E-commerce primarily focused on building business to consumer relations. E-business focused on optimizing the relationship between business and consumer. On the e-commerce side, there's 4, even maybe 5 categories now: business to consumer, business to business, consumer to consumer, and then mobile. Well, on the other side of e-business, we're classified around the concepts of distribution management, information security, staff productivity, date security, e-theft. So look at e-commerce as sort of being the front end of your business website and presence online, and e-business being the back end tactical operational piece of your e-business website online. E-commerce, more strategic in nature, not exclusively, and then e-business a little more tactical in nature. E-commerce business activity oriented, and then e-business more business execution oriented. And then finally, e-commerce is really kind of putting the controls in the hands of the consumer, while e-business puts that structure around security and control points for the consumer. So that's a different way to look at this, especially from a diversity standpoint. And one of the ways that this could play out for you as an example is look at a business like eBay. And so eBay has a strong consumer to consumer presence. It has a mobile presence. It has a B2B presence as well as a B2C presence. While at the same time, it has to make sure that security and distribution of information is extremely well executed on. So it builds relationships behind the scenes so that people feel comfortable with relationships in front of the eBay website. So that's a good example, and you can probably think of others that might come into play here. So the planning process can go through a number of stages: the formulation stage, adaptation, concentration, implementation, and evaluation. When we look at the formulation stage, we're really looking at the planning process and how the benefits, differentiation, and questions are asked. And so one of the questions you might ask yourself is, how do you successfully pull together the structure for the plan or your diversity plan? Adaptation stage, we're looking at the social, economic, legal, and technological aspects of the planning process. So one of the questions that could be posed here is, how do you categorize your ideas and apply them in the marketplace? On the concentration planning stage side of the equation, the detail is looking at goals and research. And one of the additional questions we might ask is, how do we apply the goals to our diversity plan into actionable steps or implementable steps? In the implementation planning stage, the detail looks at finances, responsibility, and the timeline. So an additional question might be, how are you going to fund your diversity plan and its programs? And then in the evaluation stage, we look at the detail of change management. So a question here from a diversity standpoint is, what changes will you make in the plan and why? What will they be based upon? So here are a few definitions that might be beneficial. Understanding the scan and the process of acquiring information on events so that you can help the organization discover some of its potential diversity trends. Understanding goal development. So specific objectives with respect to time and magnitude. Understanding strategy. And so with strategy, it's a game plan, how to obtain our diversity goals. And then last but not least, the internet. And so it's the most diverse computer network and, of course, the largest in the world. So what did we learn today? Well, we learned a little bit about SCAN, and we need to think in terms of how can a SCAN help us build our diversity plan. We learned about goals. How can the creation of goals help direct us to implement our diversity plan? We learned a little bit more about strategy. And so how strategy is derived from the SWOT and then ultimately the SWOT analysis. And then we learned a little bit about the internet. And so we should start to ask ourselves, how do we infuse or include the internet into our diversity planning? And if so, how do we get this accomplished? How do we make that work for us? So here's your thought for the day. New boots, big steps.